Hello BookTube, it's Tuesday and I'm going to be doing a book tag of sorts. It's 6 questions that one of my subscribers asked me, and I thought they're great questions and I'm going to turn them into a book tag. I hope they don't mind. It's Empress Norma put up the questions. As I say, there's 6 of them. She put up about 4 days ago, and I'm going to call it How Do You ? Book tag. And the first question is, do you read more than one book at a time? If yes, what are you reading? And do you read one book at a certain time of day and another time of day? Yes, I do read. I actually read a lot of books at the same time. I'm currently reading I'm currently reading still the Thomas Carlyle. I haven't read much in the last couple of days. I'd hoped to have been done by now because there's only 100 pages left. It's just the last couple of days have been extremely busy for me, even though I'm not at work. Just a lot of things that I've had to do. But yeah, so I want to complete that, and I'm also reading a number of things. There's book called In the Country, which is a culling of articles and poems, short story, everything from periodicals, including magazines, newspapers. They're well illustrated, so you just read one and then you can put it down if you've got a few minutes to do that. I'm still reading through slowly the Irish RM stories. I'm still on volume 2. That sort of is really slowed down. I'm reading maybe one story a week now. Rumpel story here or there occasionally. I've got a number of my books about books that are academic and they're essays. So I will read an essay at a time or a section in the book, like especially the Cambridge histories of. They have different writers for each section, so I'm reading through the history of libraries in England and Ireland, and that's 3 volumes. I'm still on the first volume. There's also 7-volume history of the book in England, and again sections. So I'm reading through that. I don't have all volumes yet, so it's a slow read. And a number of the Cambridge history of literature. I'll read a section here or there. Depends on whatever takes my fancy at the time. Yeah, that's off the top of my head. I think that's about it for those. And I do read at various times the Pepys Diary, which is I'm reading day by day, and usually before I go to bed. Occasionally I'm too tired and I'll fall asleep without reading it, but I catch up the next day. In the mornings, I'm reading a poem from this wonderful book, the British Women Poets of the Long 18th Century. And I read that in the morning, a poem in the morning. I started reading something like that, like in the mornings, when I was in university. I picked up a battered copy of Lord Chesterfield's letters to his son, and I just loved them. And so I would get up, get everything prepared, breakfast, so forth, waiting for my bus, and gave myself 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes to read a letter, and I did that every day. And I enjoyed doing that, but now I try to do that with poetry instead. So, number 2 is, how do you organize your library? Well, currently, it's partially based. It's not how I really want to do it. It's partially based on because the space, I have limited space. Let's start with the poetry because that's where I left off on the previous question. I will have. It's a very small section at the moment for ancient poets, but then I will go into sort of medieval poets up to and I go right up pretty well to the Enlightenment. I don't have enough of each of those to subdivide those. Eventually I probably will, because I'll have a Renaissance and then Enlightenment and then Romanticism. So I basically go up to Enlightenment and then Romanticism to sort of 1800, more or less. And then from 1900 to about 1930 I keep together. And then everything else it sort of peters off then for the number of poets and the books that I have. I'd like to have the space to expand that, but keeping those broad categories, and then eventually, as I get more books and more poets for various periods, subdividing those down, but they will be in alphabetical by poet. But I would also include the biographies, any critical material if I have it or do get it, letters and so forth, and keep those all together there. And fiction would be very much the exact same pattern as that, with the letters, the biography, and sometimes a little bit of cultural material that might fit in with it, and the literary history of each period. History, again, it would be, well, my ancient history is very small at the moment. It's about a shelf and a half, and half of one shelf is pretty well the Gibbon's Decline and Fall. And then a little bit of medieval, not much. Maybe a shelf. I've got a general British section that I've been collecting various histories of England, and some of those are antiquarian collections from a lot of them from the 19th century, and those are sort of general overviews of English history. But medieval, yeah, a little bit, not a lot. English, a little bit of European. Most of my English history starts around 1600 and goes up to, it's about First World War is the big part of it. With a large section of London. I have almost 2 bookcases of London history. A shelf or 2 of Cambridge, and a shelf and a bit of Oxford. First World War, I've got approximately a shelf on. Second World War, similar. And a little bit of just a few books sort of taking me up to sort of the 80s maybe of British history. But yeah, that would be the history. And then I've gone through a little bit about the roads. So I have a transport collection that's mostly kept to England and a little bit of Ireland. So we got the roads, we got the bridges, we've got the taverns, the inns. We got walkways as well that goes with carriages that go on it, the steam engines that would go on it as well, and early petrol engines, gas engines, cars basically, up to about into the 20s maybe. And then canals, history of canals and boating, inland shipping on rivers, and coastal shipping. I've also got some railways, early railways up again to about First World War. There's a few books on ballooning, airships, airplanes, early airplanes. It's anything that sort of transport that you can move, even sort of horse and travel stuff that talks about the horse being as a big part of it, rather than just specifically travel, memoir type thing. And then the books about books, those are history of the book, typography, how the book was made, illustrations, collecting, booksellers, publishers, and then it gets into sort of like the literature section that I have here. It's sort of in behind me here. But those I'd like to move out into the fiction and poetry section. Film, I've got silent film to classical film, silent film separated, classical film more or less ending around 1960 with a smattering a little film after. Bit on TV, early TV, a little bit on radio, and a few things on early music, phonographs and that type of thing. I've also got essay collection. The essays are not really separated too much other than by collections of authors. I keep them together and sort of favorite ones, and after I read it, it'll move up to sort of my favorite shelf. I've got a bit of an architectural section. I'm interested in church buildings, abbeys, houses, a little bit, mostly British, and a little bit of science, very little science, and a smattering of art. But yeah, that's sort of it. That's how it is. And then the next question is, do I want to? Do you ever have the urge to reorganize your library in a different way? Yes, as I was saying, I'd like to have a lot more space so I can spread out and each section have a little bit of space for future, because then I'll know, okay, for poetry, for instance, I don't have many poets from, say, I don't know, 1500 to 1600 or 1700. I don't have many poets. So let's concentrate on those, get some poets in there. Same as fiction. The fiction, the literature would be a little different. The poetry, I will sort of have it as a reference section. That's what the poetry is for me, is a reference section. The literature, it would be either stuff that I have read that I want to reread, or stuff that I haven't read. I don't know. Well, I suppose with the enough space, I would probably have what I would think would be a comprehensive collection of literature. But that would be a little difficult. But the poetry, I definitely would like to do that with, because that's more of a reference and workable section for me. But yeah, it just to have the space, and in every area to have that, to have some extra space. So I need 2-3 times the space that I have here. I think minimum 2, probably 3 or 4 times the space would be just fabulous to have. So I can continue. Oh yeah, I also have, I forgot to mention, my top shelf up here is it's about 4.5 shelves of African history, and specifically South Africa. But yeah, it would be nice to, again, expand all this, to travel, the exploration. Number 5, can you recall every book you have in your library, or are there books you find on your shelves that seem to have just shown up? Yes, they do occasionally just show up. I've had just recently, in the past 6 months, I found out a essayist and literary historian, his name escapes my mind at the moment, sorry, but he wrote which I thought was an introduction to every Balzac novel that was published by Dent in the late 20s or 30s. So I thought, that would be just fantastic to have. And then I found out that the introductions were put in a posthumous collection of his introductions that was put out by, I believe it was his son. So I looked for a little bit, but I couldn't find one that just looked, they were all just tatty, water-damaged ex-library, so I thought, well, I'll just leave it. I'll wait till I find something half-decent. And then I'm just passing the shelf that I walk by every day. If I sort of get up and move out of here. There it is. I've got it. It turns out it's just the introduction to the set. He did not do an introduction for every volume, sadly. But no, yeah, so that was one that just sort of popped up that I didn't realize I had actually had, or had forgotten I had. And for the life of me, I can't remember where I got it. Almost every book that I pick up, I do know where I got this and roughly what I paid for it. But occasionally there's a few that for some reason have sort of snuck in that I just don't remember. The last question, number 6, is do you collect bookmarks? Not proactively and not in the sense of a specific collection. I do keep them and I use them, but it's usually bookmarks that come with used books that I buy. And I particularly like ones that have that are old bookmarks from other booksellers. And a friend of mine who was in Edinburgh a year or two ago bought a couple used books, and there was about 3 or 4 bookmarks for an old bookseller that was there. And those are fabulous. I like those. And where I keep my collections is within books. So it'll mark a section where I've left off if it's one of those multi-essayed books, or just in a section that I thought, I want to keep, remember where that section or that passage is. And I also have some leather ones that are, I was given those, and they're from museums, castles, a few things like that. Maybe got 25, 30 of those. I do have a bit of, in a collection way, I suppose, is the old Everyman bookmarks. I have a number of those, and I'm always on the lookout for more of those. And I do keep those separately. I don't reuse those as a bookmark. But again, they're all in a cabinet here, which I can't access at the moment. Not easily, anyway. But yeah, no, that's the 6 questions. And as I say, I'm going to call it How Do You? ? Book tag. And I'm going to tag people. I'm going to tag Mark at Richardson Reads. I'm going to tag Jason at Byways and Bookland. I'm going to tag Steve Donoghue. I'm going to tag Peg at the History Bookshelf. And I'm going to tag anybody else that wants to do it, basically. If anybody else is interested in doing it. But I'm not sure how many that I've done so far there, but I tag Alan Braswell as well. Just trying to see Faith at Faith&books. I'll see if I can remember and put all those down in the bottom after I upload it. But that's it for my Tuesday book tag. Have a great reading week.